Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about outrage politics. Okay, the outrage politics, the politics of outrage at what's going on in Palestine, and especially just how, let's just say, how mean the Israelis are towards Palestinians. I mean, in the end, it really comes down to it. Just being mean, how mean they are and how hateful they are. Okay, um, now, okay, I think it's a problem. Okay, because I think this is where I think we get to the limits of our own personalities. Okay, so I think it's relevant to my channel because I believe personally, I think that anything on the narcissistic spectrum is basically an immaturity spectrum, okay, which involves a limitation in the ability of a person to hold multiple concerns, okay, simultaneously, right? I think that it really is kind of the core. It really is a processing limitation. Okay, so in the end, it is kind of a limitation. It's a type of immaturity or just shortfall, falling short in the personality, where neurologically you just don't have the carrying capacity, or you're not habituated to hold a lot of dissonant, competing considerations, okay, and be able to sort of hold multiple issues at the same time. Okay, so typically what happens, and this will happen a lot with left wing, and I'm a victim of this myself, like say with the death penalty, right? You know, um, when I have had to like say consider like say killers, murderers who in their last moments have been led to the chamber to be executed, I have always felt very troubled by that, because it's like I just look at a person being led into a chamber to be executed, and I'm thinking, God, how can we do that? How can we? And of course, now I still do not believe in the death penalty, but I'm just saying this is the psychological phenomenon when you get to one situation that's very charged. Okay, like say having someone led to a death chamber, right? That so floods us with all these feelings like how can we do this, that we start to kind of forget that person was incredibly cruel and incredibly vicious to someone else and killed them. Okay, now I know other people don't have that problem, so if I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the people that can understand me. When I get flooded by that, I sort of can't see anymore, and it sort of fades out of the picture. Okay, now this is not to say that the death penalty is a good thing. Okay, see, I can hold all these things, but we have to strive to be able to see the terribleness of somebody being led into the death chamber and still be able to see what they did and hold them all with equal weight. It's hard for us to do. Other people, let's say, and I'm sure you guys know who you are, you see like the picture of a very sexy woman or a very sexy man, okay, and it so floods you, or you see an actual person who's very attractive. Let's say you're engaging with somebody and they're so attractive that it kind of floods the other considerations, like they're just a person, maybe they're not that great, whatever. And so you lose perspective. Okay. The same thing happens with Israel. Okay. And two people that I've seen that I think really are, I think, kind of emblematic, actually three people, I'll say, but two people who really have a lot of like influencers, who really have a lot of influencers who have a lot of influence. Two major influencers who are sort of in opinion journalism are Kim Iverson and KRYSTAL. Okay, these are two very nice people. Actually, I really respect both of them. I think they're really nice people, and I think they're very intelligent, very intelligent. But I see them falling, I think, into this trap where it's like, oh my God, look how hateful Israel is. Look, they're hateful. They don't want the Palestinians. Oh my God, did you see that? You sort of look underneath everything and you see, man, systematically, the Israelis sort of want to get rid of the Palestinians. Oh, geez, how can they be like that? And I think it's kind of the same psychology as when you see, a stone cold killer, but he's being led into the death chamber. At that moment, he's very vulnerable, and all you can think about is how terrible it is to execute, and not seeing the bigger picture. Now, okay, I'm not saying it's totally analogous, because I'm not saying that all of Palestine are the equivalent of a killer, but I'm just saying we focus on the immediate sort of how the immediate unpleasantness of how mean Israel is to the Israelis, and how much they don't have any goodwill towards the Palestinians, right? The Israelis really do not have goodwill towards the Palestinians, okay? And it's like, oh my God, that's open bad will. They're openly hateful. They really want them gone, oh. But we don't see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is not that Palestine is the equivalent of a killer. I don't mean the analogy to be that crude. I'm saying the bigger picture is, okay, that the Palestinians have also hated the Israelis, okay? They've also hated the Israelis, okay? And both sides have been actively at war with each other, okay? And the Palestinians themselves, from at least their leadership, okay? I'm not saying every single Palestinian, but at least from their leadership, they have expressed sentiments to the effect that Israel is illegitimate and they shouldn't exist, okay? Now, I'm not saying that there aren't problems with the legitimacy of Israel, okay? There may be abstract theoretical problems with the legitimacy of Israel, okay? There may be abstract theoretical problems with the legitimacy of the United States, maybe the United States, let's say the whole, let's say, European conquest of the Americas, we could say that was very unfair, it's problematic, but it's now so long and so well established that what can we say? It's done. We could also say, arguably, that whatever Viking genetics, let's say the genetics of Vikings that have become, let's say, mixed into, let's say, the Irish and the Scottish people, that's an illegitimate mixture because the Vikings came in a criminal manner and sort of ravaged the innocent natives of Scotland, or what is today Scotland, or whatever. And so whatever percentage of blood those people have that's Viking, that's problematic. It's too late. That's already been done. It's things become established. And then even if we want to say that, let's say the Europeans, let's say, had an illegitimate takeover of the Americas, well, we can also say maybe certain indigenous tribes had, let's say they had morally problematic, let's say, controversial domination of other Indian tribes. Let's say before the Europeans got there, maybe some Indian tribes were more bullies with other Indians and dominated them. And so the bottom line is that at some point, unfortunately, over time, sometimes things have, let's say, problematic origins. So the legitimacy of Israel from the very beginning may have problems, may have moral issues, it may be morally questionable. But over the decades, it's become established, and so at some point, it's just a matter of realism. Okay, so all I'm saying is that, I understand that on some abstract level, okay, I understand that, there may be a point to what the Palestinians, there may be some point. They may have a point. Everybody's got a point, okay? But the bottom line is that the Palestinians do maintain today, presently, okay, from their leadership, they maintain sentiments that they'd like to see the Israelis gone, okay? So if that's true, how can we be so outraged that the Israelis are tired of them and want to see them gone, okay? In other words, I think at some point we need to sort of get over the fact, just get over it, okay? Leave the moral outrage sort of out of the picture, because that can cloud us from seeing the full picture, okay? So in other words, like, say, sometimes I can be so clouded when I see a murderer led into the execution chamber. I'm so clouded by the outrage at him being executed that I don't see the bigger picture. Now, that doesn't mean in the end that I think the death penalty is good, okay, right? But I have to accept that it is something that has a context, right? It has a context. I may not agree with it, but I have to see the context and appreciate it. Just like some people don't like war, okay? Just like the death penalty. Some people do not like war. It's hard to believe. It's hard for me to believe that we can have a death penalty. It's hard for me to believe it. I sort of can't accept it, right? But it is something that's real in the world, right? Whether we like it or not, and it has a context, right? We don't execute, at least in the United States, we don't execute people for shoplifting. We don't execute people for jaywalking. We don't even execute people for rape. Okay, we execute people for serious things. Okay, just like in the world, I don't want to accept. I don't want to accept that there is war. I tend to deny. I tend to deny the realities of war, because I just don't want to accept the reality of war, right? But war is something that's real, whether we like it or not. It's something that's established. It's a part of the human political spectrum that just exists. Okay. And it has context, right? And it has consequences, right? Once two parties get into real warfare, all right, you can no longer analogize them to, let's say, South African black people being oppressed by white people. Okay, it's so to use the word apartheid, it's sort of out of context, right? The context for Israel Palestine is war. It's warfare. Okay, these are two sides at war. They hate each other, right? And I think it would help us, even though it's hard to stomach it. I don't want to stomach it. I don't want to believe that warfare is real. It's too ugly. But warfare is real, and it is something that can happen, right? And also, let's also be really careful. You know, we talk about the outrage of Gaza. Gaza, you know, they live under they live like a prison, like in a prison. It's so we're so outraged at how non-humanitarian the reality of Gaza is, what it's like to live in Gaza. Okay, and I'm not saying it, but that's a warfare situation. In other words, Israel, after so many wars, has set up this situation. You know, it's the result of warfare, and it is part of a warfare dynamic between these two sides. I mean, they're still technically at war. You know, just because even when the bullets are not flying, the dynamic between the two sides is that of enemies. Okay, so as long as the dynamic is that of enemies, warfare is really the dynamic, right? So, and also, let's be careful. How can we as United States citizens be so stupid? Stupid. Think. I'm sorry. What are we doing in Venezuela and Cuba? Okay, go to Venezuela and Cuba. Okay, go to Cuba. Cuba is a disgusting, inhumane, just a demoralizing, obscene place where people live at levels of poverty that is just it's unthinkable, right? It just, I mean, and the thing is, like, people may go to like Havana, Cuba, but if you were to go like into Cuba and to see how poor and disgusting and demoralized people live, you know, and they just hold on to that stubborn pride of being, you know, whatever, being communist. The whole thing, it's very similar to what's happening in Gaza, in the sense that the United States has set up these terrible blockades. I mean, these blockades in both Venezuela and Cuba. And it has rendered these countries basically like these Mad Max apocalyptic. I mean, it's like unthinkable, right? And we just somehow don't perceive these things that are in the same hemisphere where we live. This is our mental problem as people. We don't see things. We sort of cannot see because we're so focused on one outrageous thing. We can't see the other thing. Okay. This thing of setting up countries to live like under blockade, you know, under economic blockades, and that's economic warfare, right? And so we need to open up and see that we have active, as Americans, as United States citizens, we have active enemy dynamics with the people of Venezuela, the people of Cuba, just like Israel has with Gaza, right? Now, like, I have sympathy for Venezuelans and Cubans, but also I recognize that the reality is these countries are sort of openly rebellious towards the United States. They're openly hostile to the United States, and the United States, just like Israel, is pretty unmerciful, and you know, and exerts sort of like economic consequences on these countries, Venezuela and Cuba, right? But that is the dynamics of warfare. So let's make no bones about it. This is not just international politics, you know, policies, whatever. This is warfare. The United States, whether we say it or not, just because technically it doesn't involve bullets, we don't actually declare war on Venezuela, but effectively we treat Venezuela as an enemy, and we deploy actual economic measures against them, which makes Venezuela, it's like, it would be actually, it might actually cause less harm to put 2 nuclear bombs in Venezuela, honestly. If you add up all the Venezuelans who've spilled out into South America and who are spilling out into Mexico and the United States, okay, all that spilling out of people and all the chaos and crime and death, and there's been a lot of dead people in Venezuela, and because of Venezuela, the hemorrhaging of the population, if you add up all that damage, it's probably about equivalent, if you just add up the raw numbers, to roughly a couple of nuclear bombs, you know, to be quite honest. I mean, because millions of people have spilled out of Venezuela, and they're living in just unspeakable conditions throughout South America. and also in the United States, right, and in Mexico and all that. Okay, and also Venezuela, because of just the chaos of the living conditions. Okay, in part because of the economic blockade, we can't even count the number of people who have died from, let's say, malnutrition, from homicide, whatever. So, I think let's not underestimate the impact of, let's say, sort of like passive aggressive warfare, economic warfare. So when we look at that siege condition of Gaza, okay, don't get so focused on it, right? This happens in North Korea, it happens in Venezuela, it happens in Cuba. The United States does it just like Israel, and we do it unmercifully. Unmercifully. If somehow you were able to get into Venezuela, you'd probably be killed. I mean, people get killed there all the time. An American there who doesn't know what's going on, it's one of the most dangerous places in the world. you know Cuba, we just don't see Cuba because somehow we just look at Havana because they sort of show Havana, but we don't see the disgustingness, people living like roaches, throughout all of Cuba. It's one of the most disgusting humanitarian obscenities that's ever existed, but it's just right there, right off the coast of Florida, and we don't even see it. Also Haiti, Haiti is not really directly because of an embargo, but just the conditions of Haiti, you know and you can analyze the economics of it, but the bottom line is that there are places in the world where people live disgustingly. Okay, and at least in the case of Cuba and Venezuela, just like with Gaza, these are the results of sort of economic warfare. In other words, bad blood between different peoples. The United States has very bad blood with Cuba, and we have very bad blood with Venezuela. Okay, and the results have been devastating. Anybody who lives like I do in South America, everybody can see it's just floods of Venezuelans all over South America because they couldn't live in Venezuela. Venezuela become almost uninhabitable. So it's very similar to the Gaza situation, right? And so instead of getting so focused on how outrageous it is, because it's disgusting, right? It is disgusting. So it's sort of like the same challenge of, like, say, seeing somebody led into an execution chamber, or seeing something really, really unpleasant, like, oh my God, the Israelis, they hate the Palestinians, they want them gone. Yeah, that's true, but it's because, bigger context, these two sides hate each other and they're actively at war with each other. Okay, even though sometimes there are periods where there's not like active bullets and active, major battles, whatever, the Palestinians and Hamas, or at least the Hamas leadership of Palestine, they cannot stand Israel. Okay, and they consider Israel an enemy. That's just the way it is. So what do we do about it? I think we have to try to learn that if you're in denial of the context, okay, if you're in denial of the warfare, the context of warfare, and you just focus on how, oh my God, they hate them, oh, the outrage, you're not gonna, your denial, because you don't like war or whatever, you're not going to accept the diagnosis of the situation. Okay, in other words, oh my God, I can't believe he's spitting blood. Oh, I don't want to think about cancer. No, I just can't stand the fact that he's spitting blood. But maybe what you have to do is accept, no, he has lung cancer. Okay, accept it. I know you hate cancer, but accept he has lung cancer. That's why he's spitting blood. The same thing here. The patient is spitting blood. In other words, all these ugly things we see with Hamas or whatever, it's because there's cancer there. Okay. And so don't get so caught up in the outrage. You have to accept the cancer diagnosis. Then you understand why the blood's coming out of the mouth. Okay. And then you can figure out what to do. Now, like any serious diagnosis. And of course, I like to be in denial of war too, but we have to accept the realities of war because that's where they are. Israel and Palestine have been at war for decades. Okay, so you accept that it's a cancer diagnosis, right? It's serious. And those of us who live in denial, we don't want to accept because, oh, that could mean terrible things. Yeah, it could mean terrible things, right? Whenever you have actual war, that's like the equivalent of a cancer diagnosis for a person. And a lot of us don't have the stomach to accept it, right? Because then you're on a different level when you accept that diagnosis. And then it's like, it's kind of grim. It's a more grim situation. And the outcome for both sides is not going to be a rosy, ideal outcome. Each side may have to accept very grim outcomes if they actually want to end the war. Okay. And so, just like with cancer, many times the ending of cancer is when the patient dies. Okay, so it's kind of hopeless in a sense. Okay, and for many Israelis and many Palestinians, the probable likely outcome of this is going to be either a terrible life or an early death. Okay, and that's just the reality, right? And that will be true for some Israelis as well. You know, probably more for the Palestinians. Obviously, the Palestinians are losing the war. Okay, and that's another problem. Okay, part of the problem with accepting a cancer diagnosis, a diagnosis of warfare. Okay, accepting that there's warfare is one side is going to be stronger than the other. Okay, that's just it. And while we're so outraged at Gaza, well, look at Venezuela. They're our enemy too. Look at Cuba. They're our enemy too. How many people die in Cuba because, and they talk about their great hospital system, and Cuba is always so bragging about how they're great doctors. They have disgusting hospitals in Cuba. Okay. And people die all the time of things like just appendicitis or just infections. Okay. But they die through the bureaucracy of Cuba, and they got all the paperwork just right. And, it looks like just whatever. But really, the reason why they die is because the hospitals suck. Okay. Or like, say, can you imagine having diabetes and they have to amputate a leg, and then the leg gets infected, and they'll just say, oh, just complications. It'll be all bureaucratically perfect on the paperwork, but it's basically because they have shitty hospitals, whatever. Okay, so the bottom line is that, the United States also has an overwhelming advantage over Cuba and Venezuela, and we don't talk about it because the news doesn't focus on it. But people in Venezuela die every day because of the chaos, the dysfunction, the poverty, the extreme, obscene poverty of what it's like to live in Venezuela because of the stubborn, government that just doesn't want to be nice to the U.S. So it's like a warfare situation, but it's a situation where the United States has a tremendous advantage, and people die every day in Venezuela because of our advantage. So that's another cancer diagnosis, right? So basically, if you accept the grim realities, okay, which is that Israel and Palestine are at war, they're at war, okay, and Israel has the advantage in a war. So that means that whatever happens, like a cancer diagnosis, a lot of Palestinians are going to get killed, a lot of them, okay. And the problem is that the Palestinian leadership is not, they're not, let's say, they're not beaten enough, they're not losing badly enough to want to give up. Even though they're losing terribly, it's almost like suicidal. They want to keep fighting. Okay. And the Israelis always talk about how Masada is like this big story of how they resisted the Romans to the point that they committed suicide. Right. Well, I think that suicidal resistance motif, I think, is very strong all over the Arab world. Okay. That's how proud these people are. So even though the Palestinians are getting their asses kicked, and they're getting their asses kicked, and they've been getting their asses kicked, they want to keep fighting even if it's suicidal. All right. So this is a disgusting, grim cancer. This is a stage 4 cancer, a very, very serious cancer, and a lot of people are going to get killed. Okay. So the reason why you see blood coming out of the mouth is because we don't want to admit that there's cancer in those lungs. Okay. On both sides, right? This is a cancerous, disgusting war. And so we think we can go in there and sort of encourage, oh, just be nicer, you don't realize the cancer you're dealing with. This is a very toxic warfare situation. And you have to first accept that before you go in there proposing all this niceness that doesn't fit the diagnosis. Okay, these are not 2 healthy lungs. These are 2 cancerous lungs, and it is deadly. Okay, and for many, many people, the outcome is not going to be survival. Okay, so when you fully accept that, right, then you can look at, well, what does it mean to end the war? Okay. Now, because the Palestinian leadership is so suicidal, they're suicidal, right? They're suicidal rebels. Okay. This talk we have in the United States, where you sit in an ivory tower at an Ivy League college, okay, and you talk about, oh, the right to resistance, right? Yeah, you don't realize that in some cultures, okay, resistance is suicidal, right? Take that seriously too. Don't just be up there in your ivory tower smoking your wonderful whatever fantasy, okay? Because you're in denial of the actual realities of warfare and how ugly it is, okay? There are people whose resistance is suicidal, okay? And they're not just going to give up. So don't just accept that there's warfare, okay? Let's diagnose it properly. This is warfare where the context is that in this culture, okay, this Arab culture, this Palestinian culture, it's suicidal resistance. Okay, they're not going to give up until they're massacred. Right. The same thing happened with Japan. Look what it took to end the war with Japan, and I think probably the Japanese are not as suicidal as the Palestinians. Okay, so take that in. How serious? What would it take to end that war? Right. So when you see how the prognosis is one of just continued horrible warfare with Palestine just getting massacred, if you see it that way, all right, then with that diagnosis, you can start to take in the realities of what it would take to end the war. Okay. And so basically, there's two ways to end a war. Okay. You can end a war through surrender or through getting your ass kicked. Okay. Getting your ass destroyed. All right. And we understand that Palestine, they will accept being destroyed because they'd rather fight than surrender. So what that means in a practical terms, coming from the legal background where you want to settle lawsuits, right? That means that the surrender terms have to be very attractive because you have to overcome their instinct to just fight to the death all the way. All right. That's how stubborn they are. So realistically, if you really want to end the war and you can't stand seeing the blood coming out of the mouth and you want to deal with this cancer diagnosis, there's only one outcome because they'll fight to the death, right? They're suicidal. You have to provide very attractive settlement terms. Okay. However, Israel, they don't want to give up a lot of land. Okay. And so the dynamics are such that it's very hard for Israel to offer attractive settlement terms because Israel is also kind of suicidal. Israel will accept a certain amount of their own casualties to maintain their position. Okay. And so Israel is probably less suicidal than the Palestinians, but they're still somewhat suicidal as well. And they're very stubborn, you know? So in other words, the price for peace, which is so high, in other words, the Palestinians would require a very good surrender term. They would have to have a very awesome, very generous surrender package. And we can see that Israel is not capable, really. They're not inclined to offer a very, very generous surrender package. So the only way this is going to end, there's two ways it can end. Either Israel can just be destroyed. Okay. I mean, just destroyed. I'm sorry, Israel, Palestine. Either Palestine can be destroyed, right? Sorry. Palestine. Either Palestine can be destroyed or there's only one way out. Other countries like the United States, Jordan, big time, and Egypt will have to offer something fantastic to the Palestinians. And that is it. There's no other solution. Okay. There can be no other solution because even if you could offer a few little token things inside the Israeli territory, it won't be that much. It won't be enough to overcome the Palestinians' suicidal, in will, their will, their will is suicide resistance all the way. Okay. So that's it. And so we can talk how much we don't like to see the blood coming out of the mouth, how much we don't like, but the cancer is that serious. That's how bad it is. It is everything, but it is a cancer diagnosis. You can pretend it's something else, but that's what it is. It's cancer. And to overcome that, okay, to overcome that serious, disgusting, reality, because Palestine is so suicidal, they will require a tremendously generous surrender package, super generous. Okay. And because Israel can't provide that, it will have to come from Egypt, Jordan, and probably the United States. And until it comes, this will be the continued over and over and over again indefinitely until they just exhaust the fever, basically. And that could take decades, right? So that's it, And I know, Palestinians say they don't want to live in Jordan. They say they want to live in Egypt, but it depends on the package, right? You have to put a very generous package in there, and until that's offered, this is where we're at. So, I disagree with KRYSTAL Ball and Kim Iverson about this outrage thing, getting stuck with the outrage of how mean the Israelis are. Of course they're mean. This is warfare, man. And look how mean we are with Venezuela. You don't think that's mean? How we are with Cuba. Get over that and look at the seriousness. It's because we're in denial that is cancer over there. Okay. So I think we need to get over the outrage and honestly diagnose the cancer and then deal with it and then accept what generous surrender terms would allow that thing to end. And it would have to be very generous. Just my opinion, but thanks for watching.